was banking and high finance, at least until a few years ago. Iceland was transformed through the ideas of one man, longtime Prime Minister David Oddsson. He decided to shake Iceland out of its social democratic past and remake the country according to his free market principles. He surrounded himself with like-minded admirers.
David Oddsson is somebody who fulfills the two criteria that Machiavelli puts up about political leaders. He is cunning as a fox, and he is courageous as a lion.
David Oddsson wanted to privatize almost everything touched by government. Iceland's #1 resource industry has always been fishing. Oddsson parceled up the country's fishing grounds and passed them off to big ship owners. On Egil Helgason's popular political TV show, the reaction was disbelief.
For many people, this would sound as it's almost surreal. You take the fishing grounds, the fish that swims in the sea, and you give it to a bunch of people who own ships for good. This is the main resource of our country. This was the beginning of what came later.
In 2003, Oddsson made his most controversial privatization. Some of the biggest banks in the country were auctioned off in suspicious circumstances. Coincidentally, they ended up in the hands of some of David Oddsson's closest friends.
Mr. Oddsson's friends were father and son who came from Russia with some money they had made from shady dealings in the brewery business in St. Petersburg. And suddenly they found themselves to be the owners of the oldest bank in Iceland. These guys didn't know the first thing about banking. In retrospect, they're either greedy criminals or complete fools.
The newly privatized Icelandic banks embarked on an orgy of dangerous financial practices. Bankers sold securities back and forth to each other at vast markups that falsely inflated their value. All Icelanders were encouraged to buy a house, or even two. The central bank lowered interest rates, flooding the country with easy credit. As in the United States, this triggered an unprecedented real estate boom. Icelanders living and working abroad came home to take advantage of the wild market.
I lived in the UK till 2003, 2004. Then I came home. I bought a flat for 9 million kroner here downtown, almost close to where we are now. 1.5 years later, I sell it for almost 15 million kroner. I'm like, hey, what's going on? I've done nothing to this flat, and here we are, 6 million kroner in my pocket, just for keeping it for 1.5 years. And of course, when you're benefiting from it, you're sort of, okay, well, this is great. There's a saying now, if something is extravagant, oh, this is so 2007, you can't be serious. 2007 is having Elton John in your 50th birthday party, as one of the business tycoons did. People just went too far. People took one loan too many. People bought one car too many.
Iceland was not alone in its reckless financial planning during the boom years. The world champion of the global real estate bubble was surely Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Money was no object, as every local sheikh and every booming company competed to see who could erect the most ostentatious building. No idea was considered too outlandish. When waterfront property rose dramatically in value, Dubai decided to make more. Ships vacuumed sand off the ocean floor to make the famous Palm Islands. On them were built an endless line of luxury condominiums and hotels that were snapped up by wealthy investors from across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Canadian Robert Lee went to work for Dubai's leading real estate company 10 years ago.
Dubai in its heydays, we used to call the sales center the fish market. It's, you know, people could come and it would say, give me an apartment, any apartment, I don't care what, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, just give me an apartment. Because in a way, people are buying options. Because most people are buying things with zero intention of actually living in it. so they were buying coupons to resell it to somebody else. We'd be selling $1 billion worth of real estate in one day.
All of this flowed from the vision of one man, Dubai ruler Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. When he saw the first plans for what would become the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa, he had only one comment to the developer: make it bigger.
I was silly to suggest a 90-story building, and the meeting was very short. He just left. But you know, I've been with him a long time, so I went again to the design studios, and then we put something really marvelous, and his question was, how much higher than anybody else? I said, it's about 40% plus. He said, great. He called me the next day and he said, where are the cranes?
Was there no limit to how high Dubai could fly before it got too close to the sun?
There was always a nagging sensation that, is Dubai going to be like the other cities around the world that has seen the fall? But at the same time, you live here for a few years, you basically buy the story. You drink the Kool-Aid. And you're saying, hey, we must be different.
While Sheikh Mohammed apparently believed that the party could go on forever, some began to wonder when the global real estate bubble would burst and what would set it off. The man who would become the central actor in the Meltdown took his position on the stage in 2006. Former Goldman Sachs CEO Hank Paulson was one of the toughest of the Wall Street titans. Then he accepted the invitation of George W. Bush to become the U.S. Treasury Secretary. It was a controversial choice. Paulson was not universally loved on Wall Street.
He was probably the nastiest guy of all of them. They used to call him the snake. And this is coming from the Wall Street executives themselves. No, you know, you really can't believe everything he tells you. The reason why they didn't like him is because they couldn't trust him.
Hank Paulson's aggressive, combative style came as a bit of a shock in government circles.
This is a guy who would go through a brick wall to achieve his objective. Leopard doesn't change his spots. I mean, you know, why do scorpions sting? They sting because that's their nature. And, you know, Hank Paulson didn't change his nature when he went to Washington.
Shortly after Hank Paulson arrived in Washington, the prices of California houses began to slide.
Sales of existing homes are down a full 12% from just a year
As prices dropped, overextended homeowners threw more properties onto the market, triggering a downward spiral.
Hank Paulson called me and started talking to me about subprime mortgages in the United States. There was a general consensus that there was too much credit and too much money sloshing around globally. We had had discussions about where this excess credit was likely to show itself, and it was showing itself in subprime mortgages in the United States, and that was a large problem.
Ça devrait se faire à partir de 14 heures.
Although few seemed to realize it, the world was now infected with the toxic financial products that depended on the U.S. real estate market. It was inevitable that someone somewhere was going to blow the whistle and question what these financial products were actually worth. As it happened, the alarm sounded in Paris in August 2007. The giant French bank BNP Paribas discovered that many of its investment funds were filled with toxic U.S. securities. They stopped all withdrawals from those funds.
It was a little bit like an old-fashioned movie where the bank president locks the door and tells people they can't get their money. It doesn't exactly make you feel good about the world.
At the Ministry of Economic Affairs in Paris, the BNP Paribas decision triggered immediate crisis meetings, convened by Finance Minister Christine Lagarde.
Ça a commencé de manière très dure, je m'en souviens très bien, parce que c'était interruption de vacances immédiate, retour à Paris et discussion immédiate avec les banques sur ces conduits qu'elles étaient en train de fermer en raison d'un début de fissure dans l'édifice financier.
If BNP Paribas couldn't value their securities, then one started asking how many other companies couldn't value their securities. How did anyone know what the value of asset managers were, or even banks? Because, of course, banks were holding the same securities. And so suddenly faith in some of the foundations of 21st century finance began to crumble.
In September 2007, as cracks were appearing in the foundations of the global economy, the titans of the Anglo-American financial system began to tremble. First up was Britain's Adam Applegarth, a true superstar in London's business class. Applegarth had it all. He joined an obscure bank called Northern Rock in 1983 and had a meteoric rise, becoming CEO of the bank in 2001.
Oh, he was a brilliant fellow, full of himself, full of confidence, felt he could do no wrong, loved the idea that he was become a transatlantic jet setter. He'd go over to New York to arrange the next tranche of securitized debt, and felt he had a model which was much better than everybody else. He didn't get it. He didn't get that he'd developed an unstable model and that the wholesale markets went wrong. His bank would fall off a cliff very, very fast, which is exactly what happened.
Good evening. One of Britain's biggest mortgage lenders, Northern Rock, is applying to the Bank of England for emergency financial support. BBC News has learned that the bank...
Within hours of the BBC bulletin, worried Northern Rock customers lined up to get their money out.
Maybe it's safe, maybe it's not, but I'd rather know that it was safe. I'm just going to go put it in my bank and then...
And I've taken all of my money out.
Most people in the Western world had never seen a bank run before with their own eyes, and so it was something they found almost impossible to imagine.
The British government was very slow to react to the panic.
It was egg on our face as the British authorities, no doubt about that, and letting those queues not only form but continue for 2 days was very damaging to the reputation of British banking.
Adam Applegarth was hauled before a British parliamentary investigation of the failure of his bank, but he was characteristically defiant.
Mr. Applegarth, do you actually accept you've done anything wrong? It was a good business model, but clearly couldn't deal with the unforeseen global freezing of the liquid markets. You keep saying it was unforeseen, yet this committee had been discussing it for 6 months.
The Northern Rock crisis in Britain could have been taken as a serious warning on Wall Street, but it was not.
I think people saw this as that's happening over there, that's not happening here. I think that the sense of interconnectedness was not realized until the very last moment.
Wall Street did not really start paying attention to the growing international crisis until one of its own megastars began wobbling in orbit, the flamboyant head of one of America's oldest and biggest banks. Through the spring of 2008, U.S. Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson was constantly reassuring his international colleagues that everything was fine with the U.S. economy and that only mild tinkering was required with the global financial system. In private, French Finance Minister Christine Lagarde advised her friend that he was being very foolish.
Je lui ai dit, Hank, on voit le tsunami qui nous arrive dessus, et tu es sur la plage en train d'hésiter sur la couleur du maillot de bain qu'on va porter.
The first major U.S. casualty of the financial crisis came with the dramatic fall of one company and one man, the richest CEO on Wall Street. Jimmy Cain was a legend. He had come up through the ranks to become president and chief executive officer of America's fifth largest investment bank, Bear Stearns. He was famous for his backslapping, hard drinking, and high living style.
Jimmy is really out of central casting. I mean, I've described him as an amiable rogue. I mean, he's definitely can be quite charming, definitely can be quite ruthless, has a twinkle in his eye, and I think that combination of ruthlessness and charm, that people get to the top with that combination.
Jimmy Kane was a flashy